Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate you taking time to talk to me today.
No, the pleasure's all mine. I'm excited to delve into the world of higher education and Salesforce, two areas you know very well. We'll get into the Salesforce piece shortly, but let's have a chat about your early career and I guess how you initially found your way into the education space.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think I kind of stumbled into education in many ways. I was originally a communication and political science undergrad at my first university I attended, and I had dreams of going to work in government, public relations. That turned out to be true a little bit, but I went to graduate school at Ball State University, and from there, kind of fell in love with the academic environment and had an opportunity to lead an online high school program at Ball State University. And so that's how I got my start there and spent, 5 years at Ball State and, got to learn the language and kind of the ecosystem of higher education in that role.
So how did that higher education career for you progress into other kind of roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, so this was really, back in 2011 and, well before, Salesforce.org. And I was running teacher training programs. I was running online high school programs where we taught, advanced math and science to high schools throughout the United States. And I was running my programs out of Microsoft Outlook, Excel, and that really got me thinking of, there's got to be a better way to do some of these things. And, eventually we stumbled upon some very lightweight CRM systems for, conference registration that we were actually able to send out a few emails, collect payment, but it was less than robust and still did a lot of, mail merge to email out of Outlook and Excel during my time at Ball State. And so it was fun, but happy that there's better tools out there today.
So was it, I guess, like where did Salesforce come into the picture for you? And was it initially as more of a user, I guess, in terms of like looking at how you could use the platform to better service your students? Is that how you kind of first came across the platform?
Yeah. So I think, kind of my Salesforce origin story is really that of an accidental admin in many ways. When I moved to Indiana University, so a very large, university in the United States, it has about 50,000 students. I really expected to see really robust software and IT programs when I got there. And I was charged with running an online graduate program in public affairs. And I had to build this program from the ground up. And they were currently tracking prospective students in a very wonky access database that a graduate student had built for them. It didn't do a lot of things. It was hard to report out of. The person building it had to know SQL, and it just wasn't a great platform. I had heard of Salesforce a little bit, and I started digging into it and found out that Salesforce offered 10 free licenses to educational institutions through the Salesforce Foundation at the time. And I applied for the licenses, was granted them, and started using the system to recruit students. Mind you, this was also way before Trailhead, Salesforce.org, and HEDA at the time, the education data architecture. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I renamed leads to prospective students and just kind of dove in. But there's minimal documentation out there to use Salesforce in education, so it's really a hands-on exercise and just kind of digging in and being curious about the platform and how it worked. And so it worked well for me, but I did spend a lot of time and learned a few painful lessons along the way, I would say.
So you hear these stories about back in the day when people used to buy Salesforce on their credit card and it kind of was just used in a silo, like isolated from the broader IT architecture and stuff. I guess you didn't buy it on a credit card because you got 10 free licenses, but it was kind of you using it for your use case and not necessarily the whole university using it as their CRM.
That is definitely accurate. And so, I essentially, I had to walk the application up to my dean's office for his signature to kind of buy it. And I have no idea if he even knew what he was like signing or what kind of system he was getting for free. And to your point, I just used it for my little individual graduate program. I was, one of two or three employees. I had a couple grad students that helped me out that I assigned licenses to, but it was definitely, I would say, a shadow system in many ways, even within my own individual college at the university. And this was even before Indiana University had gone down a Salesforce path, for the enterprise environment. And so I was definitely out there on my own. Like I said, I made a lot of mistakes, but it was very independently run, just to use the program.
Could you see even back then that there was power in the platform for it to go on and have something like it has now in terms of the higher education solution? Like, was it clear back then that this could be a platform that could be scaled across higher education?
Definitely, I saw the power, pretty quickly. Again, I was only one of two employees in the program I was running, and one of them was a full-time faculty member, so he didn't have a lot of time to spend on, running the day-to-day of the program, and so I had to find ways to really scale my efforts, and I use Salesforce to act as a multiplier in many ways. When a student called in or sent an email, I made sure that that conversation and email was saved in Salesforce. So the next time they called, I had really good notes that I could recall and really help that student move forward quickly, where they didn't have to repeat themselves. And oftentimes the student would ask, like, you must have a really good memory to remember all these things about me. I'm like, well, I take good notes in my system, and make sure that we don't have that same conversation a couple times in a row. And so it definitely helped me there. And I think I saw the graduate program, increase from like 0 students to like 100 students in a couple of years. And I really think Salesforce helped us do that in many ways that wouldn't have been possible just trying to run it out of an old Access database.
It's funny because now obviously customers or students, anyone kind of expects to be known to the company. Whereas historically back then, it was probably a bit of a shock when someone had actually made notes and stored them in a CRM.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And even, thinking back at my time there, students definitely expected like a digital experience at the time. But, back then, a student needed to register for classes oftentimes in person, or had to walk a piece of paper around campus for a random signature that someone had to get. So this was well before like e-signature that was prevalent. And, it really helped me smooth out any work I did with the students, and, just made the transactions much easier to handle all around.
So you called yourself an accidental admin, but did it kind of, having that exposure and the experience now with technology and working with a platform like Salesforce, did that kind of light a fire under you to want to pursue a career in the technology space?
It did. I would say, while I was, a political science or communications major, I always had an interest in technology. I mean, I was the type of, person that would, tear apart my computer, like replace parts, kind of, finagle with pieces of software at times. And so I was always had that interest. But what I really did was, kind of dove into the platform and saw that there was a need and a market here, for Salesforce. A lot of people that I worked with were still using antiquated systems, spreadsheets. And, I got good enough at Salesforce that Central IT at Indiana University hired me to work with other graduate programs across, the 7 campuses to tell them, both how like they could use the platform to recruit students and serve them, but also kind of use it as, a force change management activity where, you're kind of bound into your current processes based on Excel and Outlook. But if you use Salesforce or a different platform, you could do things a lot differently and have far better outcomes.
So then you moved out of education into consulting, my understanding, but continued focusing on the higher education space as an SME working in technology.
That's correct.
How important for you was that transition to not just be moving out of higher education, but still having the ability to use all of the domain knowledge you built up? Like, how much easier was that transition into consulting for you?
It was a lot easier. I think one of the other things that I did do while I was at Indiana University is, I think within a month of starting my new job there, I did enroll in the MBA program at the business school as, at a discounted tuition rate. So if you're working in higher ed, you typically get discounted tuition or free tuition in many cases for graduate programs. And so I definitely took advantage of that. And that was part of my calculation for moving to Indiana University as a career. And I really leveraged both the MBA program plus my kind of subject matter expertise in Salesforce and in education to move into consulting. And so I do get that question a lot, like how do you transition out of higher ed into the corporate sector? And for me, it was, diving into Salesforce, but also at the same time, I did take advantage of the educational benefits that were provided to me as well. And so that's how I did it. But, I think there's a lot of different ways to do it too. But, I think people that work in education can definitely take advantage of training and education to move forward in their careers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess when you go into, when you historically have gone in since leaving higher education to go into consulting, when you go in and have a discussion with a higher education establishment, it must, for them, their eyes must light up when you come in and actually understand what they're talking about.
Yeah. I always joke with colleagues, former employers that every time I did an introduction, whether it was in consulting or when I was at Salesforce, so I always, give my introduction, but I also said, I also spent 10 years directly in higher education doing recruiting and admissions, running online graduate programs, just to put them at ease in some ways. Because, I think a lot of times in higher ed, they do view themselves as kind of a bit of a special industry in many ways that doesn't have an obvious correlation to, sales or the corporate world. And there's a definitely a vernacular and language that you need to be able to speak to do well in that industry. And I think having a consultant that worked in higher ed, builds a lot of immediate trust with folks in higher ed as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's something like broader we should think about more as, hiring companies struggle to hire and find talent. It's not just higher ed, it's, financial services, understanding the terminology in that space, or, the different industries that do have those kind of nuances and language that people might not be familiar with, or processes that people don't know. Actually having someone like yourself that has that domain expertise is actually really valuable for a consulting firm.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the consulting firms that, that generally thrive in the education nonprofit world in the Salesforce ecosystem, they tend to hire folks that both have Salesforce expertise, but also direct experience in either education or nonprofit as well. That's really where the consulting firms find a lot of success, and they get better outcomes for their customers because of it as well.
So how have you seen the higher education solution that Salesforce have created evolve? Because obviously when you first started working with the platform, there wasn't one. Then I guess they introduced something several years ago. But since the introduction of the higher education data model, how has that changed? How has the solution and offering been improved?
Yeah, it's definitely gone through, a large transition from the early days of the higher education data architecture, which a lot of that was actually driven by the community of higher education professionals that were using Salesforce, within education. So they would get together in what they call open source sprints or community sprints, where they would ideate on ideas to improve the platform and use it within their campuses. And so Salesforce eventually kind of formed Salesforce.org and started to bring some of that functionality directly onto the platform and made it available to schools widely. And I think that was a big move, for both Salesforce and the ecosystem, where all of a sudden it was scalable. Schools didn't have to build things out custom every time they wanted to stand up Salesforce. And so there was a dependable data model and framework that schools were able to use, both with the education data architecture, as well as, bespoke operating applications that Salesforce and Salesforce.org eventually launched for both student success and recruiting and admissions. And so I think, Salesforce as a whole has a vibrant community within the education sphere. And I think a lot of that is owed to the way that the platform was kind of organically built through the community. And I think that is where they have a lot of success currently.
So what are some of the challenges with implementing into higher education if you compare to like a sales driven organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges is that, by and large, folks in higher ed aren't exposed to some of the concepts, and key technology features that are available to them, like you would find in the corporate world. I know a lot of times when I was a consultant, I would often walk into a customer, it, and I was there to do a Salesforce implementation. So they knew why I was there, but I would ask them, what do you want to do, as your strategy for marketing engagement? And a lot of times I would receive blank looks, not because they didn't know how to engage their prospective students or their current students, but they didn't necessarily know what was possible on the platform. And so helping them understand, kind of the art of the possible on the Salesforce platform was always a key thing, and helping them move beyond kind of their current framework and the current, legacy applications that they had that were really boxing their creativity in many ways. So a lot of times it was really educating customers on what was possible and then helping them move forward with being a bit more strategic and innovative in their approach.
Are you finding now that a lot of these higher educations are moving off of other specialized higher education platforms to Salesforce, or is it just old legacy kind of custom built applications?
I think it's a bit of both. Certainly there are a lot of legacy platforms within higher education that needs to be improved. There's also any number of shadow databases and systems that should be retired and deleted in many ways. And so there's ample opportunity within higher ed to embrace new technologies, new ways of doing business. And I think Salesforce is a great platform to do that, even beyond kind of the standard operating areas of education. And so, a lot of people think about student services or recruiting admissions and advancements, but there are scores of other places within an educational institution that can take advantage of the platform and custom build things to meet their needs and get away from kind of ad hoc point solutions or, out of that wonky spreadsheet that they've been using for a couple of years. And so I think if you're in the Salesforce ecosystem, especially in higher ed or even nonprofit too, there's ample room there to have a robust business and have a great career solving challenges and problems within higher ed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with the move, we touched on having that domain expertise, but I guess even more so now that we have Salesforce Industries or Salesforce industry specific solutions, like people that are on the user side of a project can kind of, look at ways that they can, I guess, follow a similar path to you that, you were on the business side, you used the platform, you implemented it, but then you saw an opportunity to be a domain expert. Do you think that's going to be even more of an option now that we do have industry solutions?
I definitely think it is. I think with the release of the new education cloud within Salesforce Industries, that really moves the needle quite a bit forward, where there's more out of the box functionality, and it really speaks the language of the industry. And so the time to value is a lot quicker, whether you're kind of the CIO thinking about what my cost is versus the expected value, but also for the everyday workers where they expect certain functionality to be built automatically into the system for it to work, whether it's recruiting students or serving a current student or helping them find a new major or a career. There should be ways out of the box that makes that work for them. And they don't spend time kind of learning the system and kind of fighting the system. They have more time to both serve students, but also think creatively about ways that they could use the platform to serve the student better or improve the process. But I would say, by and large, I think the future is really bright within higher education. I think higher ed, by and large, understands the need that they do need to modernize their systems, that students expect a higher level of service, certainly for in-resident students, but even for the online students too. The online institutions that are able to serve their students well at a distance, they're quick to respond. They're going to have a competitive advantage over institutions that are are using legacy systems and are trying to kind of duct tape things together at this time. And so I think it's a great time to be in higher ed. I think there's a lot of ways to be innovative, both in your day-to-day job, but also on the platform if you want to dive into the technology.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, for you, it must have been quite the journey from downloading and using the free licenses to then working at Salesforce a number of years later. So how did that come about, and what kind of roles did you hold within Salesforce?
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting journey. I had a lot of help along the way, but I would say I put in a lot of effort too. I definitely, when Trailhead came out, I spent a lot of time on Trailhead. When I joined the consulting firm that I started with, I spent a lot of time earning Salesforce certifications, kind of doubling down on my technology knowledge to pair with, my industry knowledge. And, I made the right connections and types of roles. And I was also fortunate that, I landed on some good consulting projects that went well, that allowed me to be creative and to be successful. And from there, I did jump directly into Salesforce. I focused exclusively on recruiting and admissions, go to market and product strategy within Salesforce.org, and then eventually moved into the Salesforce Industries arena as well. Again, focusing on both recruiting admissions, graduate education, and continuing education. And so my day in the life at Salesforce was really focused on product and ensuring that Salesforce had products that fit the need of the market. And so that could be working directly with a customer or the solution engineering team to assess what types of features that we should include in our product offerings, or even looking at core Salesforce functionality and learning and deciding how that could be applicable to someone in higher ed.
Yeah, it must be cool to think you've been key and played a key role in kind of shaping the product that adds so much value to universities, but also the product you still get to work with today. So you've moved into a new role recently. Can you tell me more about what you do now, and also, I guess, forward looking, what you're most excited about from the Salesforce ecosystem now?
Yeah, so I recently moved into a new role focused on go-to-market strategy and alliance strategy at Redpath Consulting Group. It's a small consultancy based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that focuses exclusively on the impact sector of education and nonprofit. And so my role at Redpath is to really help grow the team, grow the book of business, and also build a relationship with Salesforce. And so having worked at Salesforce for just under 4 years, I have great relationships with the product team, the sales team, solution engineering, and working directly with them to collaborate on ways that we can serve our mutual customers going forward. And so that can take a shape of partnering on an implementation, running a joint webinar where we host a mutual customer and we talk about the success they've had on the Salesforce platform, or it could just be hosting an event at one of the Salesforce towers. And so it's still exciting that I get to play in the Salesforce ecosystem after all these years. And like I said, I think it's a great ecosystem to play in. By and large, the customers are passionate, as are the employees at Salesforce as well.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Chad, I've really enjoyed hearing more about your career and also the higher ed space. I think it's here in Australia, we've seen a huge spike in the volume of projects across the higher ed space. And from what you've said, it doesn't seem like that will slow down. So yeah, interesting space to be in, and very interesting chat for anyone that's more also on the higher ed side that might be looking to pursue a career in technology, because you've shown that can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I've enjoyed my Salesforce career, and I would say too, I spent a lot of time in higher ed, and at some point, I'm hoping to move into technology, and Salesforce was the tool that really allowed me to do that. So, forever grateful for Trailhead and kind of the industry knowledge out there that I was able to learn from and take advantage of.
100%. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And if anyone wants to reach out, pick your brains, ask any further questions, where's the best place to find you?
Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to connect. I'm constantly on there, so if you message me, I'll definitely see it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.